Consumption emissions tell us the total carbon impact of a country's consumption, regardless of where in the world those impacts occur. This is also known as a country's carbon footprint, and it differs from territorial emissions, which focus just on those emissions generated within a country's borders. Now, to help us think about the difference between consumption emissions and territorial emissions, consider, for example, this cup of coffee. Now, using territorial emissions, the only impacts that are considered are those which have occurred here in Scotland, such as heating the water or producing the milk that went into it. But all of the emissions around growing the coffee, harvesting the beans, roasting the beans, packaging it, and shipping it here to Scotland are excluded. Now, under consumption emissions, all impacts are considered, the full carbon footprint of the cup of coffee. In other words, unlike territorial emissions, consumption emissions give you a full picture of the impacts of your consumption, both at an individual level and at a national level. So why do consumption emissions matter? Well, imagine if everyone in Scotland switched from buying Scottish milk to buying milk produced in France. Now, if we only looked at this from a territorial emissions perspective, we would see a dramatic drop in emissions. But we haven't actually reduced emissions, we've just moved them from one country to another. It's a bit like trying to clean your room by picking up all the dirty clothes and putting them in the kitchen. You haven't actually solved the problem, you've just moved it to another location. In fact, a lot of the emissions reductions we've seen in Scotland and other developed countries is the result of this kind of emissions offshoring. Increasingly in a global economy, more and more of the clothes and cars and computers and electronics that we buy are manufactured somewhere else. And that means that an increasing portion of our carbon impacts occur somewhere else. Now, Scotland has committed to ending its contribution to climate change. But to do that, we need to take responsibility for all the impacts of our consumption, and we need to use consumption emissions to do that.